Hi, I'm Keon. I'm a research analyst here with Lipper, and I'm here to speak to you about the fund flows for the week ended Wednesday, January 29th. This was a tough week for the market. The Dow was down 3.9% over these 5 trading sessions. It was driven down mostly by weak economic data out of China, as well as the anticipated the Fed easing its monthly bond buyback program. These two events led investors to flee to the safety of gold and bonds and out of equities and emerging market currencies. Turning to the flows, overall for funds and ETFs combined, we saw approximately $5.7 billion in net outflows for the week. Let's take a look at our macro group now. Equity funds experienced $10.2 billion in net inflows. This marked their 6th straight week of net inflows. Taxable bond funds had about $2.3 billion in net inflows, and for them it was their 4th straight week of net inflows. Muni bond funds had roughly $340 million in net inflows. This marked their 3rd straight week of net inflows after 34 straight weeks of net outflows. Rounding out the group, money markets had net outflows of roughly $5.8 billion. Now let's turn our attention to equity funds. As I mentioned previously, equity funds experienced $10.2 billion in net inflows for the week. This was split amongst domestic and non-domestic. We saw domestic take in $7.8 billion and non-domestic $2.4 billion. The bulk of the U.S. inflow was attributable to one fund. The GMO shifted assets from one of its private placement funds, the GMO U.S. Flexible Equities Fund, into one of its open-end mutual funds, the GMO U.S. Core Equity Fund. This accounted for $5.8 billion of the U.S. inflows. All right, let's take a look at our equity ETF category now. This was the complete opposite of the equity fund category. Equity ETFs saw outflows of $11.6 billion for the week. This was led by SPY, which saw $7.5 billion leave its coffers, and followed up by EEM, which had $2.5 billion leave. Inflows in this category were pretty much muted for the week. Leading the way was IYR with about $900 million in inflows. Now we're going to take a look at our taxable bond funds. As mentioned previously, taxable bond funds have experienced 4 straight week of inflows. This started with the week of the 8th, which saw $4.0 billion flow into it. Over the last 3 weeks, it's been holding steady right around the $2.3 billion mark. And this week we saw the lion's share of the inflow came from our funds in the corporate investment grade debt categories, accounted for about $1.7 billion of the $2.3 billion. And looking back at the 2 previous weeks, we also see that corporate investment grade debt funds account for most of the inflows. Switching over to taxable bond ETFs, we see about $1.2 billion in net outflows for the week. 2 ETFs contributed mostly to this was HYG, which had $670 million flow out, and then as well as JNK had $300 million leave. For the inflows, both TLT and TBT had $170 million come in for the week. Looking at our Muni bond fund category again, this was, as stated previously, this was the 3rd straight week of inflows for the category, and this was also the largest week of inflows at $340 million. And this was driven by funds in our national muni categories, which saw inflows of approximately $442 million. Alrighty, let's take a quick look at our money market funds. Money markets experienced net outflows of roughly $5.8 billion on the week. This was split amongst taxable money markets, which saw $3.2 billion leave, as well as tax-exempt money market funds, which had about $2.6 billion leave. So pretty much almost evenly split there between the 2 categories. Okay, well, that will wrap up our weekly flows report this week. For those of you who are looking for more information, please feel free to visit us at our website at www.lipperusfundflows.com. Please tune in again next week, as it looks like we'll have another interesting week in store as global fears continue to drive the markets down, and we'll see a changing of the guard at the Fed as Janet Yellen will take over for Ben Bernanke. I'm Keon. Thanks, and have a good week.